Welcome to today's podcast, Supporting Dying Matters Week. My name is Paul Bye, and I'm part of the management team here at Lodge Brothers. I'm pleased to be joined by our chairman today, Robert Lodge.
Good morning.
We will be chatting about the family business and finding out a little bit more about the challenges that he has to face on a daily basis. Morning, Robert, and welcome to Lodge Talks. It's great that you can support us during this Dying Matters Week. Why don't we start by you telling our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm the chairman of Lodge Brothers, and along with my other family members, we are the seventh generation to manage and care for the families in the communities we serve.
But for those listeners that don't know, perhaps you could explain about the family roles and responsibilities within Lodge Brothers.
Sure. Fundamentally, we're all funeral directors. We're all qualified funeral directors, and we all learnt with our respective fathers and uncles to look after the families at their time of need. But obviously, being in a service profession, a lot of the infrastructure needs careful management so that we can actually deliver on the day of the funeral and meet our families' needs. So a lot of the roles behind the scenes are spent managing the systems and processes and procedures to allow us to maintain our reputation.
Lodge Brothers are the longest serving family-owned funeral business in our local area, and working with family I'm sure can be fun. What do you think is the secret of success when it comes to working with family?
That's a very good question, and I think it's really important for any funeral director to keep it simple. I think if you have the philosophy that everything you do is run through the prism of what is best for the client, you can't go wrong. So all the decisions we make, all the services we provide, all the standards we try and maintain is actually putting ourselves in our client's shoes and trying to deliver on a service that we would actually personally want to receive at the time of need.
During your time as a funeral director, what do you think's been the most significant change that you've observed over the last few decades?
There's probably a number of changes. How the profession has been changed. When I first started, there were lots of small little family businesses. They have been slowly bought by larger players. There's one or two venture capitalists being involved, and there's not very many family businesses still operating. That's on the side of kind of service availability to our clients and the bereaved, but actually how funerals have actually changed. Previously, funerals were very kind of related by religion. That played a big part, but funeral services have changed. We have more funeral celebrants. Obviously, a lot of clients now have already pre-purchased their funeral, so I would say approximately 15 to 20% of the funerals we carry out have already been pre-purchased. The person whose funeral it is has already made the decisions beforehand and actually left guidance and ideas for their family, which has been really helpful, and allowed the families who are grieving guidance from their loved one to know the type of style they wanted. So that's been really helpful. But in a changing world where people's expectations are always increasing, we've just got to make sure that we maintain our standards. People want tradition, but in a modern setting.
I think that's a nice link to Dying Matters Week, which is all about having conversations about planning, being prepared, and perhaps you might just expand a little bit on what you touched on earlier and why you think it's important to consider discussing your wishes for funerals in advance.
This is a really difficult subject for families, and I think it's really difficult for each of us because it's all involving our mortality, and it is upsetting, but it makes such a huge difference to families to actually know what that person would like. I carried out a funeral this week where I met the deceased probably 2 years ago when her husband passed away, and we sat there, and unfortunately she had cancer, and she said to me, "Mr. Lodge, I really like you to look after my funeral when I pass away." And I said, "Oh, we didn't, it's really difficult. It's a real difficult subject." And the children were upset, and we ended up having a conversation about what she would like. And it was upsetting for all of us, including myself, because, you're discussing something that's going to happen in the future. But it made such a big difference. And we actually had the funeral this week, and it was a really beautiful service, and it's a real service of thanksgiving and celebration because we knew exactly what she wanted. And it actually added peace of mind to the family and actually, in a way, contentment, because the music we had, how we personalised the funeral was all down to her, and we were just sticking to what she wanted. And it really took the burden off the children and the grandchildren, and it allowed them to, in a way, kind of smile and think of mum, grandma, because we were carrying out exactly what she wanted regarding the flowers, the balloons, the route that we took, who was going to take the service. She specifically obviously asked for myself, but the minister, exactly what she'd like to have in the coffin with her, all these small things that you wouldn't normally think about. None of us would think about, but we had that conversation. And I think it made a huge difference to her, helped her come to terms with what was going to be happening the next couple of years, but also for the children and the large family. And she was the centre of their lives, and she was the real matriarch. And it just helped them and took away, in a way, kind of guilt that we all feel. I think things that weren't said are said, things that we need to carry out. I think it's just not about dying matters and planning for a funeral, but it actually acts as a catalyst for other subjects that we need to discuss with our loved ones and things that we need to say to each other to make sure that when that time does happen, we've all told each other in a way that we love each other and we're here to look after each other.
It certainly is good to talk, that's for sure. For those perhaps who have suffered a bereavement and the last 12 months have been particularly difficult, mainly due to the pandemic, what should be considered, do you think, in regards to perhaps commemorating a loved one, or maybe even for people to access the correct bereavement support?
It's been a really hard year for all of us, and I think we're still coming to terms with that. I think it has changed us. I think it's made us realise what's important. And, a lot of the funerals we're carrying out were very small, very restricted. We know that. We know what the rules and regulations were in place. And I think now we're getting to that point where we are starting to discuss with families we cared for in the last year, that they're starting to think about how they can commemorate and celebrate it. And it doesn't have to be anything major. It could be in your own garden with family. And I think the bottom line is family and friends. They're the important people, and they're just to signify and recognise that person's life and allow others to be involved. And because probably the bereavement may have happened 9 months, 6 months ago, hopefully the rawness of the bereavement has started to subside and allows you to start to think about the funny things, the positive things, the personality, and allows you to celebrate that, whether it's in a local pub, a local golf club, or in your garden. Yeah, I think hopefully some good will come out of this, and actually might change how people kind of reflect and commemorate people's lives in the future.
And I guess if you don't mind, a personal question, how has everything in the last 12 months impacted your family life?
I mean, that's a tough one. I think all of us have, I suppose, suffered. I think when you're dealing with the number of deaths that we've had to look after families and these restrictions, plus we have kind of, in a way, we have two families. We have our work family, those we work with. We have our bereavement families, and then obviously we have our own families. And, it's been tough. I think it's tough for all of us. But I think it's probably one of my own personal kind of philosophies is there's somebody always worse off than you. And you don't want to become maudling. You don't want to just reflect on your own stresses. There are people far worse off than ourselves who are still struggling, still coming to terms. So I think all of us who are funeral directors, I think the currency that keeps us going and makes us do what we do is that we are actually making a difference to people's lives. And as much as it might be tough for you personally, it's far tougher for the families that we're looking after or some of your colleagues. So yeah, I think that's our currency. It's a bit like the caring professions, the nurses. We're doing good. We're making a difference to people's lives.
And finally, with the funeral profession in mind, what's your biggest hope for 2021?
Well, I think for all of us, in a way, it's kind of my business philosophy, really. Keep it simple. I think just getting back to doing the things that we took for granted, seeing family, seeing friends, being able to just wander down the road to the local pub, have a pint with your friends, being able to pop into each other's houses. Also on a professional level, getting back to offering funerals where people haven't got to worry about turning up, haven't got to worry about wearing a mask. It has completely desensitised funerals, having to wear a mask and the limited numbers. So it'd be lovely to get back to kind of funerals as they were 2 years ago. And I think that's really important for the bereavement process and allow those to, not just the funeral, but after the funeral. And one thing I've really realised is that there is a rhythm and rhyme. There's a process to a funeral, which is obvious, but there's the intensity of before the funeral, then the funeral service itself. But when people come out of the chapel and then start talking to their friends and family, and then going on to the wake or celebration, Thanksgiving setting, we haven't been able to do that. And that's going to make a big difference to people, to go away, have a glass of wine or a cup of tea and talk about their feelings and talk about the person who's gone.
So, Robert, look, thank you ever so much for your time today. It's given us an insight to your role as chairman at Lodge Brothers. I found it always interesting and fascinating spending time with you. This is the last podcast in our series, and I hope you found these throughout the week very helpful. If you've missed any of our podcasts, then they're available on our usual social media channels using our hashtag, the family you can turn to. Robert and I can be contacted at Lodge Brothers using the email info@lodgebrothers.co.uk should you wish to raise any questions directly. And further support can be accessed via our website www.lodgebrothers.co.uk. Using our online chat facility, you can message us with your requests and an expert will be back in touch with you. In the meantime, thank you for listening and stay safe.